She was invisible to everyone at the hospital, just another paramedic doing her job, until a bleeding Navy SEAL captain stumbled through those emergency room doors, looked straight at her, and whispered the one word that shattered her carefully hidden past, Reaper. In that moment, the quiet woman they had all ignored was about to reveal why she was once the most feared combat medic in special operations history. If you love your mom and dad, hit that subscribe button right now and show them some love. Grace Hayes had mastered the art of being invisible. At Metropolitan General Hospital in Seattle, she existed in the spaces between recognition and obscurity, moving through 12-hour shifts with mechanical precision while her colleagues barely remembered her name. She preferred it that way. The other paramedics saw her as competent but distant, skilled but cold, someone who did her job with flawless execution but never stayed for drinks, never shared personal stories, never let anyone pass the carefully constructed walls she had built around her new life. They called her the Ice Queen behind her back, and Grace pretended not to hear, pretended not to care, because being forgotten was exactly what she needed to survive. 3 years had passed since Grace had walked away from her previous life. 3 years since she had traded combat boots for nursing shoes. 3 years since she had buried the person she used to be under layers of mundane routine and deliberate anonymity. Every morning she woke up in her small apartment overlooking Puget Sound, went for a run along the waterfront to quiet the memories that still haunted her sleep, showered away the sweat and the nightmares, and put on the navy blue paramedic uniform that represented everything her old life was not. Safe, predictable, boring. She had chosen this existence deliberately, trading adrenaline for monotony, trading purpose for peace, trading the weight of lives saved and lost for the simple rhythm of shift work in a civilian hospital where the most dangerous thing she faced was an occasional aggressive drunk or a contagious disease. Her colleagues at Metropolitan General knew nothing about her past. They did not know that the steady hands that started IVs with barely a glance had once performed emergency surgery in the back of a moving helicopter under enemy fire. They did not know that the calm voice that reassured anxious patients had once talked wounded soldiers through unimaginable pain while calling in air strikes on enemy positions. They did not know that the quiet woman who ate lunch alone in the break room had once been part of an elite special operations medical unit that operated in the darkest corners of the world, saving American lives while eliminating threats that would have killed them all. Grace had scrubbed that person away, or at least she thought she had, burying Reaper under the unremarkable identity of Grace Hayes, paramedic, nobody special, nothing to see here. The other paramedics tolerated her competence but found her impossible to connect with. Jessica Martinez, a bubbly 26-year-old who seemed to make friends with everyone, had tried countless times to break through Grace's walls, inviting her to birthday parties and girls' nights and weekend barbecues. Each invitation met with a polite decline and a vague excuse. Eventually even Jessica had given up, shrugging to the others that some people just preferred to be alone. Marcus Chen, the senior paramedic who had been at Metropolitan for 15 years, appreciated Grace's skills but found her intensity unsettling. The way her eyes constantly scanned every room she entered, the way she positioned herself with her back to walls, the way she moved with an efficiency that seemed almost military. He had asked her once if she had served, and she had given him a flat stare and a single word that ended the conversation. No. Dr. Rebecca Stone, the ER attending physician who ran the trauma bay with an iron fist and a brilliant mind, was the only one who seemed to sense that there was more to Grace Hayes than met the eye. She had watched Grace handle a mass casualty incident with a level of tactical thinking and command presence that seemed far beyond a civilian paramedic's training. She had seen Grace assess and prioritize 15 patients in under 3 minutes, directing resources with military precision while never losing her composure. But when Rebecca had tried to ask about her background, Grace had deflected with practiced ease, and Rebecca had learned to appreciate the mystery while respecting the boundaries. Whatever Grace was hiding, Rebecca decided, she had her reasons, and as long as she kept saving lives with that remarkable skill, her secrets were her own. The night everything changed started like any other Tuesday evening shift. Grace arrived at the hospital at 6:45 p.m., 15 minutes early as always, and changed into her uniform in the women's locker room while the day shift chattered around her about their plans for the evening. She checked her equipment with meticulous attention, ensuring her medical bag contained everything she might need, then headed to the ambulance bay to check the rig she would be using for the shift. Her partner for the night was Danny Wilson, a good-natured paramedic in his early 30s, who had learned to fill the silence during their calls with cheerful monologues that required no response. Grace appreciated that about Danny. He did not push, did not pry, did not expect her to be anything other than what she appeared to be. The first few hours of the shift were routine. A motor vehicle accident on I-5 with minor injuries. An elderly woman with chest pain who turned out to have severe heartburn. A construction worker with a lacerated hand from a circular saw. A teenager having a panic attack after smoking marijuana for the first time. Grace moved through each call with practiced efficiency. Her assessment skills sharp, her interventions precise, her documentation thorough. Danny continued his running commentary on everything from the Seahawks' chances this season to his girlfriend's obsession with true crime podcasts. And Grace made appropriate sounds at appropriate intervals while her mind stayed focused on the work. It was just after 10 p.m. when everything went sideways. The radio crackled to life with a priority 1 call that made Grace's blood run cold even before she fully processed the words. All available units, we have a mass casualty incident at the Everett Naval Station. Multiple casualties from an explosion during a training exercise. SEAL team involved, requesting immediate response from all trauma-certified paramedics. Grace felt something shift inside her chest. A sensation she had not experienced in 3 years. The old instincts waking up like a sleeping predator, suddenly catching a scent. Danny looked at her with wide eyes and said, "That's us? We're trauma-certified, we have to respond." And Grace was already moving, already calculating response times and resource allocation, already slipping back into a mindset she had sworn she would never access again. The drive to the naval station took 17 minutes, and Grace spent every second of it forcing herself to breathe, forcing herself to stay in control, forcing herself to remember that she was Grace Hayes now, not Reaper, just a civilian paramedic responding to a call. But her hands had already started moving with the old muscle memory, checking and rechecking equipment, mentally reviewing trauma protocols that went far beyond civilian training, preparing for scenarios that most paramedics would never encounter. Danny was talking rapidly, nervous energy pouring out in speculation about what they might find. But Grace was silent, her mind already at the scene, already triaging, already in combat mode. The naval station was chaos when they arrived. Military personnel were running in multiple directions. Smoke was rising from a building near the waterfront, and wounded personnel were being carried toward a makeshift triage area that had been set up in a parking lot. Grace stepped out of the ambulance and her training took over completely. She moved through the scene with deadly efficiency, her eyes cataloging injuries and priorities in seconds, her voice cutting through the chaos with clear, calm commands that people obeyed without question. She did not notice the surprised looks from military medics who wondered who this civilian paramedic was and why she moved like she had been doing this in war zones. She did not notice Danny staring at her like he had never seen her before. She only noticed the wounded, the priorities, the critical decisions that would determine who lived and who died. She was working on her 4th patient, a young sailor with severe burns and a potential airway compromise, when she heard a voice that stopped her heart. "Reaper." The word was spoken quietly, almost reverently, and it cut through the noise of the scene like a knife through silk. Grace's hands froze for a fraction of a second before she forced them to continue working, forced herself not to react, forced herself to ignore the impossible. But the voice came again, stronger this time, tinged with pain and disbelief. "Reaper, is that really you?" Grace looked up and found herself staring into the face of Captain Marcus Reid. A man she had not seen in 7 years. A man who had been there on the worst day of her life. A man who knew exactly who and what she really was. He was sitting against a wall, his left leg clearly broken, his shoulder bleeding from shrapnel wounds, but his eyes were sharp and focused entirely on her. The rest of the scene seemed to fade away as they stared at each other across the distance of years and secrets and carefully buried pain. Grace opened her mouth, but no words came out. What could she possibly say? Marcus made the decision for her, his voice cutting through her paralysis with command authority. "I need you, Reaper. Not in a minute, not after you finish with him. Now." The use of her call sign, the tone of absolute authority, triggered something deep in Grace's brain, old training overriding her carefully constructed civilian identity. She finished securing her current patient's airway, gave rapid instructions to another medic, and moved to Marcus's side with the fluid efficiency of a special operations veteran. As she knelt beside him, her hands already assessing his injuries, he grabbed her wrist with surprising strength and pulled her close enough to whisper. This was not an accident. Someone sabotaged the training exercise. 3 of my men are dead and 4 more are critical. But that is not why I need you. There is an active threat, Reaper. The sabotage was a distraction. Someone is hitting the chemical weapons storage facility on the north end of the base right now. They have hostages. They have enough chemical agents to kill everyone in a 50-mile radius. And you are the only person I know who has the training to handle what is coming next. Grace felt the world tilt on its axis. She had walked away from this life. She had buried Reaper. She had built something safe and normal and boring. But looking into Marcus's eyes, seeing the desperation and the certainty that she was the only one who could help, she felt the carefully constructed walls she had built around her old self begin to crumble. I am not that person anymore, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus's grip tightened on her wrist. You never stopped being that person. You just pretended. And right now, pretending is going to get a lot of people killed. I need Reaper, Grace. The world needs Reaper. Are you really going to let innocent people die because you are scared of who you used to be? The words hit Grace like a physical blow because they were true. She was scared. Terrified, actually. Not of the danger, not of the chemicals or the hostiles or the impossible odds. She was terrified of becoming Reaper again, of letting that person out, of remembering what it felt like to be that effective, that deadly, that alive. Because if she became Reaper again, even for a moment, she did not know if she could put that person back in the box. But then she heard an explosion in the distance, heard screams, and her decision was made. Some calls you could not refuse. Some responsibilities you could not walk away from. Some versions of yourself you could not keep buried when lives hung in the balance. Grace stood up and looked down at Marcus with eyes that were no longer those of a quiet civilian paramedic. Get me a secure radio and a map of the facility. I need to know the exact location of the chemical storage, the number and position of hostages, and what resources you have available. And Marcus, I am going to need my kit. Marcus smiled despite his pain, a grim expression that held relief and recognition. Your kit has been in a secure locker at SEAL Team 3 headquarters for 7 years. We never cleaned out your gear. Somehow we all knew you might need it again someday. The next 30 minutes were a blur of activity that felt both foreign and intimately familiar. Grace barked orders at stunned military personnel, who scrambled to obey the civilian paramedic, who suddenly commanded the scene like a general. She studied maps and schematics with Danny watching in absolute shock. Unable to reconcile the quiet woman he thought he knew with this tactical genius, who was coordinating a response to a terrorist attack. Jessica Martinez had arrived with another ambulance and stood frozen, watching Grace communicate with Navy SEALs using terminology and abbreviations that made no sense for a civilian. Dr. Rebecca Stone, who had rushed to the scene when she heard about the mass casualty, watched with narrowed eyes as pieces of a puzzle she had not known she was solving suddenly clicked into place. When they brought Grace her kit, a worn tactical medical bag that looked like it had seen combat in multiple theaters, she ran her hands over it like greeting an old friend. Inside was equipment that went far beyond standard paramedic gear. Specialized trauma supplies designed for battlefield medicine. Compact surgical instruments that could save a life in the field. Chemical agent antidotes and detection equipment. And, tucked in a side pocket, her old military ID and credentials that identified her as Chief Petty Officer Grace Hayes, Special Operations Combat Medic, callsign Reaper, with clearances and certifications that explained everything and nothing at all. Rebecca Stone approached as Grace was gearing up, her expression a mixture of shock and understanding. You were military, she said. Not a question but a statement of newly understood fact. Grace looked up at her, and for the first time in 3 years, she did not deflect or deny. I was a lot of things, Rebecca. Most of them I would rather forget. But right now, I have to be those things again because people are going to die if I do not. Rebecca nodded slowly, processing this revelation. What do you need from me? Grace felt a wave of gratitude for this woman who did not demand explanations, who did not judge, who simply offered support. I need you to coordinate medical response for when I bring the hostages out. Some of them may be exposed to chemical agents. I am going to do everything I can to prevent that, but you need to be prepared for the worst-case scenario. Marcus had been moved to a more secure location where his injuries could be properly treated, but he had refused to leave until he briefed Grace on the situation. The terrorists, and they were clearly terrorists based on the sophistication of their operation, had taken over the chemical weapon storage facility with a team estimated at 8 to 12 hostiles. They had killed the guards and taken 4 civilian contractors and 2 military personnel hostage. The facility contained nerve agents, blister agents, and other chemical weapons that were supposed to be destroyed under international treaty but had been delayed due to technical complications. If those agents were released, either deliberately or through damage to the storage containers, the casualties would be catastrophic. The base commander, a hard-eyed Navy captain named Morrison, was initially skeptical about involving a civilian in what was clearly a military operation, but Marcus vouched for Grace with an intensity that could not be dismissed. Captain Morrison, I have served with the best combat medics in the world. Reaper is better than all of them combined. She has medical skills that can save the hostages and tactical skills that can neutralize the threat. She has trained for exactly this scenario. And most importantly, she has actually survived this scenario. 7 years ago in Kandahar, she was part of a team that stopped a chemical weapons attack while under heavy fire, saved 32 lives, and eliminated 14 hostiles. She is the only person on this base with the specific experience we need. Morrison studied Grace with the assessing gaze of a man who made life-and-death decisions regularly. This is highly irregular. You are a civilian now. You have no official authority here. If something goes wrong, the political fallout will be immense. Grace met his gaze steadily, and when she spoke, her voice carried the confidence of someone who had stared down death and won. Captain Morrison, with all due respect, I do not care about political fallout. I care about those 6 hostages who are going to die if we do not act fast. I care about the thousands of civilians who will be casualties if those chemical agents are released. You can court-martial me afterward if you want, but right now we are wasting time. Give me a team and let me do what I was trained to do. Something in Grace's words or demeanor convinced Morrison, or perhaps it was simply the desperate reality of the situation. He authorized her to work with SEAL Team 5, who were gearing up for a rescue operation but had no one with chemical weapons expertise. The team leader, Lieutenant Commander Jake Harrison, was a grizzled veteran who looked at Grace with open skepticism until Marcus pulled him aside and had a quiet conversation that changed his expression from doubt to respect. When Jake approached Grace, his first words were, "Marcus says you are a ghost, that you saved his life twice and he has never seen anyone better at combat medicine under fire. That is high praise from a man who does not give it easily. So here is the deal, Reaper. You follow my orders on tactical movement. I follow your orders on anything medical or chemical related. We work together, we communicate constantly, and we bring those hostages home alive. Can you do that?" Grace extended her hand and Jake shook it, surprised by the strength in her grip. "I can do that, Lieutenant Commander. But I need you to understand something. I have been out of the game for 3 years. My civilian life was a choice, a necessary one, but it has made me soft in ways I do not fully understand yet. I am going to be operating on old training and muscle memory. If I start to freeze up or hesitate, you need to snap me out of it. Lives depend on both of us being at our best." Jake nodded, appreciating her honesty. "Fair enough. And Reaper, for what it is worth, Marcus told me why you left. What happened in Kandahar, losing your entire team like that, it would break most people. The fact that you are willing to step back into this now, knowing what it cost you, that takes courage most people do not have." The mention of Kandahar sent a spike of pain through Grace's chest, but she forced it down, forced herself to focus on the present crisis rather than past trauma. There would be time to process, time to grieve again, time to deal with the ghosts she was resurrecting. But not now. Now she had a job to do. She geared up with SEAL Team 5, accepting body armor and weapons with hands that remembered exactly how to check and load them despite 3 years of deliberate forgetting. The team moved toward the chemical storage facility with tactical precision, and Grace moved with them, her body falling into old patterns, her mind cataloging threats and assessing scenarios with the cold efficiency that had earned her the call sign Reaper. The approach to the facility was tense and methodical. Grace's medical skills were paired with her tactical knowledge, allowing her to identify potential injury patterns and prepare interventions while simultaneously reading the battlefield the way Jake and his team did. When they reached the perimeter, Jake halted the team and gestured for Grace to move up beside him. Through night vision optics, they could see the facility, a squat concrete building surrounded by security fencing and guard towers that were now ominously dark. Jake whispered, "Intel says the hostiles are concentrated in the main storage area with the hostages. We need to get eyes inside before we move. Can you tell me what chemical agents we are dealing with and what the risk profile looks like?" Grace studied the building and pulled out a tablet that connected to the facility's database through a backdoor that Morrison's intelligence officer had provided. She scrolled through inventory lists, her face growing more grim with each passing second. "We have got VX nerve agent, mustard gas, and sarin in that facility. All of them are incredibly lethal. All of them are stable in storage but become deadly if the containers are compromised. The terrorists know this, which means they are using the threat of release as their leverage. They are not suicide attackers, or they would have already released the agents. They want something, which gives us time but also makes them unpredictable." Jake absorbed this information and made a tactical decision. "We go in quiet, we neutralize hostiles before they can react, and we secure the hostages and the chemical storage simultaneously. Reaper, I need you with the hostage rescue element because if anyone is injured or exposed, they will need immediate intervention. Can you shoot if you need to?" Grace's hand moved to the pistol holstered at her side, checking it with automatic precision. "I can shoot, Jake. I am not as good as your guys, but I can hit what I aim at. My job is medical, but I will do whatever is necessary to protect the hostages and the team." Jake looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, we move in 3 minutes. Stay close to Miller and Chen, they are your tactical coverage. You focus on keeping people alive, they will focus on keeping you alive. If shooting starts, you get the hostages to cover and you treat the wounded. Everything else is secondary." "Understood." Grace felt her heart rate elevate, felt adrenaline start to flood her system, felt the old combat mindset taking over despite 3 years of civilian life. "Understood." The entry into the facility was textbook SEAL operation perfection, silent and deadly efficient. Grace moved with Miller and Chun through darkened corridors, her medical training on high alert for any signs of chemical exposure while her tactical awareness cataloged threats and cover positions. They reached the main storage area and positioned themselves for the assault. Grace could see through a grimy window that the hostages were huddled in a corner, visibly terrified, while armed men in tactical gear moved around them. One of the men was holding what looked like a detonator, and Grace's blood ran cold when she realized what it was connected to. They had rigged the chemical storage containers with explosives. If that detonator was triggered, everyone in a 10-mile radius would be dead within minutes. Jake's voice came through her earpiece, calm and controlled. "Reaper, do you see the detonator?" Grace keyed her mic twice, the silent affirmative they had agreed on. Jake continued, "That changes everything. We cannot risk a gunfight near those containers. We need the detonator secured before we engage. I need you to tell me if there is a medical approach, something that might incapacitate the holder without triggering his dead man switch." Grace's mind raced through options, considering and discarding scenarios until one possibility emerged. "If I can get close enough, I can use a sedative injection, fast-acting, would drop him in seconds. But I would need to be within arm's reach, and he would need to not see me coming." The plan was insane and everyone knew it, but it was the only option that did not risk triggering the chemical release. Jake made the call. "Reaper, you are authorized to attempt medical approach. Miller and Chun will provide distraction. On my mark, they will create a diversion at the east entrance. You will have approximately 15 seconds to move in, inject the target, and secure the detonator before his nervous system shuts down. If anything goes wrong, if he moves toward the trigger, we take the shot and pray. This is as dangerous as it gets. Are you sure you can do this? Grace thought about all the reasons to say no, all the very valid arguments for why sending a civilian paramedic who had been out of combat for 3 years on what was essentially a suicide mission was a terrible idea. But then she looked at the hostages, saw their terror, saw the devastation that would occur if the chemicals were released, and she heard herself say, "I can do this. Give me the mark." She prepared the sedative with hands that were perfectly steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. The drug was military grade, designed for rapid incapacitation in field conditions, and it would drop her target in less than 5 seconds if she hit the injection site correctly. 5 seconds. That was her window. 5 seconds between injection and collapse. 5 seconds during which he could trigger the detonator and kill them all. Jake counted down. 3, 2, 1. Mark. Miller and Chun breached the east entrance with flashbangs and shouts, drawing the attention of every hostile in the room. Grace moved like water, slipping through the chaos with the kind of invisible efficiency that had earned her the callsign Reaper. She reached her target in 4 seconds, saw his finger starting to tighten on the detonator as he reacted to the distraction, and drove the needle into his neck with the precision of thousands of hours of medical training. She felt the resistance of skin and muscle, felt the drug discharge into his bloodstream, and then she was counting. 1, 2, 3. His eyes went wide. 4. His knees buckled. 5. He collapsed and Grace caught the detonator before it could hit the ground, before his spasming hand could trigger it, before everyone died. The room erupted into controlled violence as SEAL Team 5 engaged the remaining hostiles with lethal efficiency. Grace dropped to the ground with the hostages, shielding them with her body while her free hand kept the detonator stable. Gunfire echoed in the confined space and Grace forced herself to stay calm, to focus on the terrified civilians rather than the combat happening around her. She spoke to them in a low, steady voice, the same voice she had used with wounded soldiers in firefights, reassuring them that they were going to be okay, that help was here, that they just needed to stay down and stay calm. One of the hostages, a young woman probably in her mid-20s, was hyperventilating and Grace recognized the early stages of a panic attack that could become a medical emergency. She shifted position, never loosening her grip on the detonator, and made eye contact with the woman. "Look at me. Focus on my voice. You are safe now. Breathe with me. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. You can do this. Stay with me." The firefight lasted less than 30 seconds, though it felt like an eternity. When the shooting stopped, Jake's voice cut through the ringing in Grace's ears. "All hostiles neutralized. Reaper, what is your status?" Grace looked up from her position shielding the hostages and met Jake's eyes across the room. "All hostages accounted for and uninjured. Detonator secured. We need an explosive ordnance disposal team here immediately to disarm the charges on the chemical containers. And someone needs to take this damn trigger because my hand is starting to cramp." Her attempt at dark humor broke the tension and several of the SEALs actually chuckled. Jake moved to her position and carefully took the detonator from her hand, his expression a mixture of respect and disbelief. "That was either the bravest or the craziest thing I have ever seen. Reaper, probably both. You just saved a lot of lives." Grace stood up and immediately shifted back into medic mode, assessing each hostage for injuries or chemical exposure. 2 of them had minor cuts from being knocked around by their captors. 1 was showing signs of shock that would need monitoring, but overall they were in remarkably good condition given the circumstances. She worked methodically, her hands steady, her voice calm, doing what she had been trained to do and what she had walked away from 3 years ago. One of the hostages, an older man who identified himself as a civilian contractor named David Walsh, kept staring at her with an expression Grace could not quite read. When she checked his vital signs, he grabbed her hand gently and said, "I know who you are. I was in Kandahar 7 years ago. I was one of the people you saved during the chemical attack. You probably do not remember me. There were so many wounded that day. But I remember you. You carried me out of that building while it was falling apart around us. You saved my life then, and you saved it again today. Thank you, Reaper." The words hit Grace like a freight train, bringing back memories she had spent 3 years trying to bury. Kandahar, the chemical weapons facility that terrorists had seized. Her team, 8 of the best special operations medics in the military, going in to rescue hostages and prevent a catastrophic release. The explosion that had killed 7 of her teammates. The desperate hours of treating wounded while fighting off attackers while the building collapsed around them. The impossible choices about who to save when there were not enough hands or time or supplies. The faces of the people she had pulled from the rubble and the faces of the people she had not reached in time. And then the debrief, the medals, the hollow praise for being the sole survivor of her team. The guilt that had consumed her until she could not function anymore and had to walk away from everything. Grace realized she was crying, tears streaming down her face while David Walsh held her hand and the hardened Navy SEALs around her pretended not to notice. She had not cried in 3 years. She had locked all the grief and guilt and trauma away, had built walls that nothing could penetrate, had convinced herself that if she did not feel it then it did not hurt. But standing in this chemical weapons facility, having just prevented another catastrophic attack, face to face with someone she had saved during the worst day of her life, the walls crumbled completely. Jake materialized at her side, his hand on her shoulder steady and grounding. "Reaper, we need to move the hostages out. Can you do that? Or do you need a minute?" Grace wiped her eyes roughly, angry at herself for the weakness. But Jake's next words stopped her. "Hey, no shame in this. You just did something incredible and you came face to face with your past. Anyone would need a minute. But those people need to get out of here, and they trust you. So take your minute if you need it. But then we move." Grace took a deep breath, then another, forcing herself back under control. She looked at Jake and nodded. "I am good. Let us get them out." She turned to the hostages and spoke with authority that commanded attention. "Okay, everyone, we are moving out now. Stay together, stay calm, and follow the SEALs. They are going to get us to safety. If anyone starts feeling dizzy or having trouble breathing, you tell me immediately. We are still in a potentially contaminated area until the EOD team confirms the chemical containers are stable. Move with purpose but do not run. Let's go." The extraction from the facility was tense but uneventful. Grace stayed with the hostages, constantly monitoring them for any signs of chemical exposure while SEAL Team 5 secured the route. When they finally emerged from the building into the cool night air, Grace felt something release in her chest, a tension she had been carrying since Marcus had called her by her old call sign. The hostages were immediately surrounded by medical personnel, including Dr. Rebecca Stone, who began coordinating their treatment with the efficiency Grace had always admired. Rebecca caught Grace's eye and there was a wealth of unspoken communication in that glance. Understanding and respect and recognition that everything had changed between them. Captain Morrison approached as Grace was removing her tactical gear, his expression unreadable. "Chief Petty Officer Hayes," he said, using her military rank deliberately. "That was extraordinary work in there. You saved those hostages and prevented a catastrophic chemical release. The Navy owes you a debt of gratitude." Grace looked at him tiredly, feeling every one of her 34 years plus about a decade more. "I am not Chief Petty Officer Hayes anymore, Captain. I left that person behind 3 years ago. I am just a civilian paramedic who did what needed to be done." Morrison studied her for a moment, then shook his head slowly. "With all due respect, ma'am, I do not think you left that person behind. I think you just stopped being her for a while. What you did tonight was not something a civilian paramedic could do. That was the work of someone with exceptional training and courage. The question is, what are you going to do now?" It was the question Grace had been avoiding since the moment Marcus had called her Reaper. What was she going to do now? Could she really go back to the quiet anonymity of Metropolitan General Hospital? Back to being invisible Grace Hayes after everyone had seen what she was capable of? Could she put Reaper back in the box after letting her out, after remembering what it felt like to operate at that level, to make decisions that mattered life and death, to be part of something larger than herself? She did not have an answer, so she gave Morrison the only truth she knew. "I honestly do not know, Captain. I need time to process what happened here tonight. I need to figure out who I am now that everyone knows who I was." The next several hours were a blur of debriefings and medical checks and paperwork. Grace answered questions from military intelligence, from the FBI, from Homeland Security, each agency wanting to understand exactly what had happened and how a civilian paramedic had ended up being the key to resolving a terrorist incident. She told the truth, mostly, leaving out the emotional complexity and focusing on the tactical realities. Marcus had recognized her. She had the specific skills needed for the situation. She had acted to save lives. Simple. Clean. Except nothing about it was simple or clean, and Grace knew that the repercussions of tonight would echo through her life in ways she could not yet predict. It was almost dawn when Grace finally made it back to the main triage area, where Metropolitan General Hospital personnel were still working to treat the injured from the original training accident that had brought her to the naval base. Danny Wilson spotted her immediately and rushed over, his face a mixture of concern and confusion and something that looked like awe. "Grace, what the hell just happened? You went from being my quiet partner to commanding Navy SEALs to stopping a terrorist attack. Who are you? What are you?" Grace felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her, emotional and physical depletion that left her barely standing. "I am someone who used to be someone else, Danny. Someone who tried to leave that person behind but apparently did not do a very good job of it. I am sorry you had to find out this way. I know you must have questions." Danny surprised her by pulling her into a hug, something Grace would have normally rejected instantly, but in her current state she found herself accepting the comfort. When he pulled back, his expression was sincere. "I do have questions, about 1,000,000 of them, but mostly I just want to know if you are okay. Because you just went through something intense and you look about ready to collapse. Whatever else you are or were, you are my partner and my friend, and I am worried about you." The simple kindness of his words threatened to break Grace's composure again. She had spent 3 years keeping everyone at arm's length, convinced that connection was dangerous, that caring would only lead to loss. But standing here, surrounded by people who had seen her at her most vulnerable and most powerful, she realized that maybe isolation was not the answer. Maybe the problem was not caring too much but trying not to care at all. Jessica Martinez appeared with 2 cups of coffee, pressing one into Grace's hands without asking if she wanted it. "You look like death warmed over, which, given what I just heard you did, is apparently your specialty. Drink this, and when you are ready, when you have had time to process and rest, I want to hear your story. The real story. Not because I am nosy, though I totally am, but because I want to understand. You have been working next to me for 3 years and I did not know you at all. I want to fix that if you will let me." Grace sipped the coffee, which was terrible hospital cafeteria brew, and found it was exactly what she needed. "I will tell you, Jess, both of you, when I figure out how to explain it in a way that makes sense. But I appreciate you not pushing right now." Dr. Rebecca Stone approached the small group, her professional demeanor firmly in place but her eyes showing concern. "Grace, you need to be medically evaluated. You have been exposed to a potentially contaminated environment. You have been through significant physical and emotional stress, and you are exhibiting signs of exhaustion. I need you to come with me and let me run some tests." Grace wanted to argue, wanted to insist she was fine, but Rebecca's expression made it clear this was not optional. She nodded and allowed herself to be led away, Danny and Jessica watching her go with expressions of concern and curiosity. The medical evaluation was thorough and professional, Rebecca checking for chemical exposure, physical injuries, and signs of psychological trauma with the same methodical care she brought to all her patients. As she worked, she spoke quietly. "I always knew there was more to you, Grace. The way you moved, the way you assessed situations, the way you never seemed rattled no matter how chaotic things got. I thought maybe military, maybe law enforcement, but I never imagined special operations combat medic. That is elite. That is the kind of training most people never achieve. Why did you leave?" Grace was silent for a long moment, considering how much to share. Finally, she decided that Rebecca deserved the truth. "I lost my entire team, Rebecca. Everyone I worked with, everyone I trained with, everyone I cared about, killed in one mission. I was the only survivor, and I could not handle it. The guilt, the nightmares, the constant sense that I should have died with them. I left because staying meant remembering, and I could not live with those memories." Rebecca's hands paused in their examination, and she met Grace's eyes with deep compassion. And tonight brought it all back. It was not a question. Grace nodded, feeling tears threaten again. Tonight brought it all back. But it also showed me that maybe running from it was not the answer. Maybe I need to find a way to integrate who I was with who I am now, instead of trying to pretend that person never existed. Rebecca finished her examination and sat down beside Grace, a gesture of solidarity rather than doctor-patient hierarchy. That is going to be hard work, Grace. It is going to require you to process trauma you have been avoiding for 3 years. It is going to mean being vulnerable with people, letting them see your pain and your strength. But I think you can do it. Tonight proved you are capable of extraordinary things when you stop holding yourself back. The sun was fully up when Grace was finally cleared to leave. She stood outside the hospital, still in her borrowed tactical gear because her civilian clothes were somewhere back at the scene, and looked out at the city waking up to a new day. She felt different, fundamentally changed in ways she was only beginning to understand. The quiet paramedic who had disappeared into anonymity was gone, blown apart by a single word from a SEAL captain and a terrorist attack that had forced her to become Reaper again. The question now was who she would choose to be going forward. Could she find a middle ground between the invisible Grace Hayes and the legendary Reaper? Could she use her extraordinary skills while maintaining the emotional distance she needed to survive? Or did she need to stop trying to protect herself and instead learn to live fully again, risks and pain and connections and all? Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "This is Marcus Reid. I heard you are cleared medically and finishing up paperwork. I am still laid up at the base hospital with this damn broken leg. But I would appreciate a visit when you get a chance. We have some things to talk about. Things I should have said 7 years ago." Grace stared at the message, knowing that visiting Marcus meant confronting even more of her past, but also knowing that avoiding it would just delay the inevitable. She texted back, "I will be there this afternoon. We do have a lot to talk about." Then she called a rideshare and headed home, desperate for a shower and a few hours of sleep before she had to face anything else. Her apartment felt different when she walked in, like it belonged to someone else, someone who no longer existed. The carefully neutral decor, the lack of personal photographs or mementos, the deliberate absence of anything that might trigger memories or emotions, all of it suddenly seemed sad rather than safe. Grace stood in her living room and looked at this space she had created as a sanctuary from her past, and she realized it was actually a prison. She had been so afraid of feeling pain that she had cut herself off from feeling anything at all. She had been so determined not to be Reaper that she had stopped being fully Grace. Something had to change. After a long shower that did little to wash away the emotional residue of the night, Grace tried to sleep, but found her mind racing with thoughts and memories and questions she could not answer. Finally, she gave up and sat on her couch, staring out at Puget Sound and letting herself remember. She thought about her team, the 8 brilliant, brave, funny, frustrating people she had worked with for 3 years. She let herself remember their faces, their voices, their quirks and strengths and the bonds they had forged through shared danger and purpose. She let herself feel the grief she had been suppressing, the enormous weight of their loss, the guilt that she had survived when they had not. And as she cried, really cried for the first time since she had walked away from the military, she felt something shift inside her. The grief did not disappear, but it became something she could carry rather than something that crushed her. That afternoon, Grace drove to the Naval Base Hospital to visit Marcus. He was in a private room, his leg in a cast and his shoulder heavily bandaged, but his eyes were alert and focused when she walked in. "You look like hell," he said with a slight smile. Grace laughed, surprising herself. "You are not exactly looking your best either, Captain. How are you feeling?" Marcus shifted in his bed, wincing slightly. "Like I got blown up during a training accident and then watched the most talented combat medic I have ever known come back from the dead to save the day. So pretty good, all things considered." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Marcus continued. "I owe you an apology, Grace. When you left the military, when you walked away after Kandahar, I should have fought harder to get you the help you needed. I should have made sure you were not just surviving but actually healing. Instead, I let you disappear, and that was wrong of me. Grace felt a lump form in her throat. You were not responsible for me, Marcus. I made my own choices. I needed to leave, needed to get away from everything that reminded me of that day. Marcus shook his head. But you did not get away, did you? You just buried it. And carrying that much unprocessed trauma for 3 years, that is dangerous. I have seen what happens to operators who try to tough it out, who think they can just ignore what they have been through. Catches up eventually, and when it does, the fallout is catastrophic. Last night could have been that catastrophic fallout for you, Grace. Instead, it became something different. Catalyst, maybe. A chance to integrate your past with your present instead of keeping them separate. Grace sat down in the chair beside his bed, feeling the weight of his words. I do not know how to do that, Marcus. I do not know how to be both people at once. Reaper was so focused, so capable, so sure of herself. Grace Hayes is just trying to get through each day without falling apart. How do I reconcile those two versions of myself? Marcus reached out and took her hand, a gesture of support and connection. You do not reconcile them, Grace. You accept that they are both you. Reaper was not a different person. She was you operating at your highest level in extreme circumstances. Grace Hayes is you trying to find peace and normalcy after trauma. Both are real. Both are valid. The question is not how to choose between them, but how to build a life that honors both parts of who you are. They talked for another hour, Marcus sharing his own struggles with PTSD and trauma, Grace slowly opening up about the nightmares and the guilt, and the 3 years of carefully maintained emotional distance. It was the most honest conversation Grace had had since leaving the military, and while it was painful, it was also healing in ways she had not expected. When she finally left, Marcus called after her, Grace, one more thing. The Navy wants to reinstate you. Not active duty necessarily, but as a consultant and instructor, someone who can share your skills and experience with the next generation. They are going to make you an official offer. I hope you will at least consider it. The offer came 2 days later, delivered by Captain Morrison in person at Metropolitan General Hospital. Grace had returned to work, unsure what reception she would receive from her colleagues, who now knew her secret. She had been pleasantly surprised by a mixture of curiosity, respect, and acceptance. The hospital administrator had been less pleased, concerned about liability and publicity, but Dr. Stone had advocated for Grace forcefully, pointing out that her actions had saved lives and reflected well on the hospital's training standards. Grace had been reinstated with full support, though she suspected her days of flying under the radar were permanently over. Morrison's offer was comprehensive and unexpected. The Navy wanted her to serve as a consultant on chemical and biological weapons response, to train special operations medics in her specialized techniques, and to be available for crisis response in situations that required her unique skill set. The position would be part-time, allowing her to continue her civilian work, and would come with rank restoration to Chief Petty Officer, full benefits, and a salary that would significantly improve her financial situation. It was everything she had walked away from, repackaged as something that might actually be sustainable. Morrison gave her 2 weeks to decide. Grace spent those 2 weeks in deep introspection, talking with Rebecca, with Marcus, with a therapist that Rebecca had recommended who specialized in military trauma. She thought about what she wanted her life to look like, about whether she could handle being Reaper again even in a limited capacity, about the risks and rewards of saying yes versus the safety and limitations of saying no. She went for long runs along the waterfront, pushing her body until her mind quieted enough to think clearly. She sat in her apartment and looked at the blank walls and decided it was time to put up some pictures, to acknowledge her past instead of hiding from it. She visited the memorial for her fallen teammates, a small plaque at the Special Operations Command she had not been able to face for 3 years, and she finally said goodbye properly. In the end, her decision came down to a simple realization. She had spent 3 years trying to be someone she was not, trying to suppress the parts of herself that were powerful and capable and trained for extraordinary things. And while that had kept her safe, it had also kept her from fully living. Being Reaper again, even part-time, scared her. But being half a person for the rest of her life scared her more. She called Captain Morrison and accepted the position with one condition. She wanted regular psychological support and the freedom to step back if the work became too triggering. Morrison agreed immediately. The transition was not easy. Grace had to learn how to exist in both worlds, the civilian hospital where she was still Grace Hayes the paramedic and the military spaces where she was now Chief Petty Officer Hayes the consultant. She had to navigate the curiosity of her civilian colleagues while maintaining operational security about her military work. She had to rebuild relationships that had atrophied during her 3 years of isolation. And she had to confront her trauma repeatedly, every time she taught a class or responded to a crisis, revisiting the skills and memories she had tried to bury. But there were unexpected gifts in the transition as well. Danny and Jessica became real friends, not just work acquaintances, as Grace slowly learned to let people in. Dr. Stone became a mentor and confidant, helping Grace navigate the complex emotions that came with her dual roles. Marcus became a regular presence in her life, his own recovery from injuries creating a bond of mutual support and understanding. And Grace discovered that using her skills to train others, to prepare them for the kinds of situations she had survived, gave her a sense of purpose she had not felt since leaving the military. 6 months after the incident at the naval base, Grace stood in front of a class of special operations medics, teaching them advanced trauma care techniques. She had just finished demonstrating a complex procedure when one of the students, a young corpsman who could not have been more than 22, raised his hand. "Chief Hayes, I heard you were at Kandahar. I heard you saved 32 people during a chemical weapons attack while most of your team died. Is that true?" The room went silent, everyone watching to see how Grace would respond to a question that would have destroyed her 6 months ago. Grace looked at the young corpsman and saw herself at that age, confident and capable and having no idea what real loss would feel like. She took a breath and made a choice to be honest, to be vulnerable, to use her pain as a teaching tool. "Yes, it is true. My team responded to a terrorist seizure of a chemical weapons facility. The operation went bad fast. An explosion killed 7 of my 8 teammates. I spent the next 6 hours treating wounded while fighting off attackers while the building collapsed around us. I saved 32 people that day. I also watched good people die because I could not reach them in time, because I had to make impossible choices about who to treat first. I carried guilt about that day for years. I left the military because I could not handle the weight of being the sole survivor. And then 6 months ago, I found myself in an almost identical situation, and I had to become that person again to save lives. So yes, it is all true. And the reason I am telling you this is because someday you might face something similar. You might have to make impossible choices. You might lose people you care about. And you need to know that you can survive it, that the guilt and the pain do not have to destroy you, that being strong enough to save some lives does not mean you failed because you could not save them all." The young corpsman nodded slowly, his eyes showing a new understanding. Another student raised her hand. "Chief, how did you get through it? How did you come back from something like that?" Grace smiled, a genuine expression that felt hard-won. "Honestly, I did not get through it alone. I tried that for 3 years and it almost destroyed me. What got me through was finally accepting help, finally letting people see my pain, finally understanding that asking for support is not weakness but wisdom. I have a therapist I see regularly. I have friends who understand what I have been through. I have work that gives me purpose. And I have learned that you do not get over trauma, you learn to carry it in ways that do not crush you. That is the real lesson I want you to take from this class. Your technical skills will save lives, but your emotional resilience will save you. Do not make the mistake I made of thinking you can do this alone." After the class, Grace walked out into the Seattle sunshine and checked her phone. There was a text from Jessica inviting her to dinner with some of the hospital crew. There was an email from Marcus with an article he thought she would find interesting. There was a reminder about her therapy appointment next week. And there was a notification that she had been nominated for a commendation from the Secretary of Defense for her actions at the naval base. Grace looked at all of it, the evidence of a life that was full and complicated and sometimes messy but undeniably real, and she felt something she had not experienced in 3 years. She felt whole. She was not just Grace Hayes the quiet paramedic anymore. She was not just Reaper the legendary special operations medic. She was both integrated and complex, strong and vulnerable, capable of extraordinary things while also being human enough to need help sometimes. The journey from that night at the naval base to this moment had been painful and challenging, filled with confrontations with her past and difficult work to build a different future. But standing here, with the sun on her face and a life full of purpose and connection ahead of her, Grace realized that being dismissed had actually been a gift. It had allowed her to hide when she needed to heal in her own time and way. And when the moment came that she could no longer hide, when a SEAL captain had called her by her codename and shattered her carefully constructed anonymity, she had been ready to become herself again. Not the person she had been, and not the person she had pretended to be, but someone new, someone better, someone who had learned that the quietest person in the room might just be the most dangerous, the most capable, and the most worth knowing. Grace texted Jessica back accepting the dinner invitation, sent a quick reply to Marcus, and headed to her car. She had a shift at the hospital tonight, routine work that would seem boring compared to stopping terrorist attacks but was no less important. She had people who needed her medical skills, colleagues who had become friends, patients who deserved her full attention and care. And tomorrow she had a training session with a SEAL team that was deploying to a hot zone. 2 worlds, 1 life, finally coming together in a way that felt sustainable and real. As she drove through the city, Grace thought about the question Captain Morrison had asked her that night at the naval base. What was she going to do now? She had not known then, could not have predicted the journey she would take over the following months. But now she knew the answer. She was going to live, fully, authentically, with all the complexity and courage and vulnerability that required. She was going to be Reaper when the world needed her special skills. She was going to be Grace Hayes when she needed peace and normalcy. And most importantly, she was going to stop apologizing for being both. The quiet paramedic they had all dismissed was never really quiet at all. She was just waiting for the right moment to remind everyone that strength does not always announce itself, that the most powerful people are often the ones you overlook, and that when a crisis comes, you want the person who has been through hell and came out the other side still able to save lives. Grace Hayes was that person. Reaper was that person. And she was finally, fully, ready to be herself. Let us know in the comments which part of the country you are watching this from.